She was just another 10-year-old coloring quietly in row 9, sipping apple juice while adults discussed weekend plans. But when Captain Rodriguez collapsed unconscious at 30,000 feet and panic filled the cabin, little Lily Chin shocked everyone by screaming, "I can fly," revealing her deceased pilot father's secret training. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe. It was a sunny Saturday morning, November 4, 2024, when American Airlines Flight 1847 prepared for departure from Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport bound for Denver International. The Boeing 737-800 was filled with weekend travelers heading to Colorado for early skiing, business meetings, and family visits, creating the relaxed atmosphere that characterized Saturday morning flights. Among the 156 passengers settling in for the 2-hour journey north was 10-year-old Lily Chin, sitting alone in seat 9A with her bright purple backpack stuffed with coloring books, snacks, and the iPad that would keep her entertained during the flight. Lily was small for her age, with straight black hair pulled into neat pigtails and wearing a pink hoodie with cartoon airplanes printed across the front that made her look like any other elementary school kid traveling to visit family. She had arranged her belongings carefully in the seat pocket and on the fold-down tray table, setting up her coloring supplies with the methodical precision that adults often found endearing in children. To everyone around her, she appeared to be exactly what she seemed, a well-behaved young girl flying alone under the airline's unaccompanied minor program, probably visiting divorced parents or attending some family gathering in Denver. The flight attendant assigned to monitor unaccompanied minors, Jessica Martinez, approached Lily's row with the warm, slightly exaggerated cheerfulness that airline crew members used when dealing with children. "Hi there, sweetheart. I'm Jessica, and I'll be taking care of you during our flight today," she said, crouching down to Lily's eye level in the way adults did when they wanted to seem less intimidating to kids. "Are you excited to go to Denver? Maybe going to see some snow?" Lily looked up from her coloring book with the polite smile that adults expected from well-mannered children, her dark eyes bright with intelligence that Jessica interpreted as typical childhood curiosity rather than the analytical awareness it actually represented. "Yes, ma'am, I'm going to visit my grandmother," Lily replied in the soft voice that made adults unconsciously speak more gently to her. "She lives near the mountains." What she didn't mention was that her deceased father, Captain James Chin, had taught her basic aviation principles during their weekend trips to small airports around Arizona before his tragic death in a private plane accident 2 years earlier. Jessica smiled warmly, completely unaware that she was looking at a child who had spent countless hours studying flight simulator programs that were far more sophisticated than the simple games most kids her age played. "That sounds wonderful, honey. Have you flown by yourself before?" Lily nodded quietly, not explaining that she had memorized the Boeing 737's emergency procedures manual that her father had left behind, or that she spent most evenings practicing emergency scenarios on a professional-grade flight simulator program that most adults would find incomprehensibly complex. The businessman in seat 9B, Robert Kim from Scottsdale, glanced over at Lily with the benevolent interest that childless adults often showed toward well-behaved kids during flights. "Flying all by yourself, huh? That's pretty grown up," he said with the condescending tone adults used when they thought they were being encouraging to children. "I bet this is exciting for you." He had no way of knowing that Lily had been studying advanced aviation concepts since she was 8 years old, driven by a desire to understand the technical details of the accident that had claimed her father's life and a natural aptitude for complex systems that her mother had never fully appreciated. Lily smiled politely at Robert's comment, the way her father had taught her to respond to adults who meant well but didn't understand her interests or capabilities. "Yes, sir, it's pretty exciting," she said quietly, returning to her coloring book which was actually camouflaging a simplified diagram of aircraft systems that she had printed from aviation websites. While other kids her age were coloring cartoon characters, Lily was methodically working through hydraulic system schematics and emergency procedure flowcharts that she had modified to look like innocent children's activities. Captain Mike Rodriguez and First Officer Sandra Walsh completed their extensive pre-flight preparations in the cockpit, both experienced pilots with excellent safety records but no awareness that one of their passengers possessed more theoretical knowledge about emergency procedures than many commercial pilots accumulated during entire careers. Rodriguez had been flying for American Airlines for 15 years, while Walsh was building time toward her eventual captain upgrade, and both were looking forward to the routine Saturday morning flight to Denver with good weather and light air traffic expected throughout their route. The other passengers in Lily's section were typical Saturday morning travelers. Margaret Foster, a kindergarten teacher from Tempe, sat across the aisle reviewing lesson plans for the upcoming week. Behind Lily, Dr. Patricia Williams, a child psychologist from Phoenix, was reading a professional journal about childhood development and exceptional capabilities in young people. None of them paid particular attention to the quiet girl in row 9, seeing only what they expected to see, another unaccompanied minor being well cared for by the airline staff. At exactly 9:15 a.m. Mountain Standard Time, Flight 1847 pushed back from Gate A14 right on schedule, beginning the taxi sequence that would take them to runway 8R for departure. As they moved through the Phoenix Airport's complex taxiway system, Lily pressed her face to the window with what adults interpreted as typical childhood fascination with airplanes and airports, but her trained eye was actually cataloging ground operations, noting fuel truck positions, analyzing marshaller signals, and mentally comparing the real-world procedures she was observing to the detailed airport operations she had studied in her simulation programs. The taxi to the runway took about 8 minutes due to moderate Saturday morning traffic, giving Lily time to observe the airport's operations with the analytical intensity that had characterized her approach to learning ever since her father's death. She watched other aircraft movements with professional interest rather than childish excitement, noting takeoff procedures, ground control interactions, and the complex coordination required to keep a major airport functioning safely. Other passengers saw a cute kid watching planes. Lily was conducting a comprehensive analysis of real-world aviation operations that most adults would never notice or understand. Robert Kim tried to engage her in conversation as they waited in the departure queue behind 3 other aircraft. "Look at all those big planes. Pretty cool, right?" he said, gesturing toward the other jets waiting for takeoff clearance. "I bet you can't wait to be up in the sky." Lily nodded enthusiastically, though her excitement came not from the novelty of flying but from her deep appreciation for the technical complexity of aviation operations that she had been studying obsessively since her father's death. "I really like airplanes," Lily said quietly, which was perhaps the most understated comment she had ever made in her short life. What she didn't tell Robert was that she had memorized the performance specifications of most commercial aircraft, understood the principles of aerodynamic lift and control surface authority, and could recite emergency checklists for situations that most pilots hoped never to encounter during their entire careers. At 9:27 a.m., Flight 1847 received takeoff clearance from Phoenix Tower Control. Lily felt the familiar surge of acceleration as Captain Rodriguez advanced the throttles to takeoff power, the Boeing 737 CFM56 engines producing the 24,500 pounds of thrust needed to lift their aircraft and its 156 passengers into the Arizona morning sky. The takeoff roll and initial climb seemed routine to other passengers, but Lily was automatically monitoring engine sound, rotation speed, climb rate and initial turn coordination with the analytical awareness that her father had taught her to apply to every aspect of aviation operations. They lifted off into the clear Arizona sky at 9:29 a.m., climbing steadily through 10,000 feet as Phoenix fell away below them and the stark beauty of the Sonoran Desert stretched to the horizon. Lily gazed out her window with genuine appreciation for the landscape, though her trained eye was also reading atmospheric conditions, evaluating visibility, and noting the cloud formations that indicated weather patterns they might encounter during their northbound flight toward Colorado. The flight attendants began their beverage service as they reached their assigned cruising altitude of 37,000 feet, the aircraft settling into the smooth, stable flight that passengers expected during clear weather conditions. Jessica Martinez approached Lily's row with her cart, still maintaining the cheerful, child-friendly demeanor that was part of her professional training when dealing with unaccompanied minors. "What would you like to drink, sweetie? We have apple juice, orange juice, soda," she offered, speaking in the sing-song voice adults used when they thought they were being especially nice to children. "Apple juice, please," Lily replied politely, accepting the small plastic cup with the quiet "thank you" that impressed Jessica with its genuine good manners. Jessica had no way of knowing that Lily's politeness came not just from good upbringing but from the military-influenced discipline that her father had instilled in her, teaching her that courtesy and professionalism were essential characteristics of anyone involved in aviation operations, regardless of age or position. 45 minutes into the flight, as they crossed into Colorado airspace over some of the most rugged terrain in the American West, Lily was deep in what appeared to be a children's activity book, but was actually a simplified version of emergency procedure diagrams that she had created to help her memorize complex response protocols. She had developed this camouflage technique after her mother had expressed concern about her daughter spending so much time reading technical manuals that seemed inappropriate for someone her age. The disguised materials allowed her to study aviation procedures in public without attracting the kind of adult attention that would result in concerned questions about whether such advanced content was suitable for a 10-year-old. What none of the adults around her realized was that Lily Chin possessed an almost photographic memory for technical procedures and had spent the past 2 years systematically learning everything she could about aviation safety, emergency response, and aircraft systems. Her motivation wasn't just intellectual curiosity but a deep emotional need to understand every aspect of the flying that her father had loved so much and that had ultimately claimed his life when a mechanical failure caused his Cessna to crash during a routine training flight at a small airport outside Phoenix. Her mother, Dr. Susan Chin, was a pediatrician who worked long hours at Phoenix Children's Hospital and had never fully understood her daughter's intense interest in aviation. She saw Lily's flight simulation hobby as a slightly unusual but harmless way for a child to stay connected to her father's memory, not realizing that her daughter was developing expertise that exceeded what many adult pilots learned during their initial training. The sophisticated flight simulator setup in Lily's bedroom was far beyond anything most kids her age could comprehend, featuring realistic aircraft systems, accurate emergency scenarios, and detailed procedures that required adult-level analytical thinking to master. Margaret Foster, the kindergarten teacher sitting across the aisle, noticed Lily's intense concentration and smiled approvingly. "What a studious little girl," she thought to herself. "Her parents must be so proud of how focused she is." Margaret had no way of knowing that Lily was currently memorizing the proper sequence for engine-out emergency procedures, or that the child's understanding of aircraft systems rivaled that of many commercial pilots. Dr. Patricia Williams, the child psychologist sitting behind Lily, had been observing the girl's behavior with growing professional interest. Something about Lily's demeanor struck her as unusual, not in a concerning way, but in a fascinating way that suggested exceptional capabilities that most children her age didn't possess. The child's composure, her methodical approach to organizing her materials, and her analytical focus on what appeared to be educational content were all indicators of someone with far above-average cognitive abilities and emotional maturity. At 10:43 a.m. Mountain Time, as Flight 1847 flew over the Colorado Rockies at 37,000 feet above some of the most remote and challenging terrain in the continental United States, Captain Mike Rodriguez suddenly felt a sharp, stabbing headache that seemed to come from nowhere, followed immediately by severe dizziness that made the instrument panel blur in front of his eyes. He tried to dismiss it as altitude-related discomfort or maybe dehydration from the dry cabin air, but the symptoms intensified rapidly, accompanied by nausea and a growing sense that something was seriously wrong with his physical condition. "Sandra," he said quietly to his first officer, trying to keep his voice steady while his vision began to tunnel and his hands started shaking on the flight controls. "I'm not feeling well. Something's wrong." First Officer Walsh looked over at her captain with immediate concern, noting the sweat that was suddenly beading on his forehead despite the cool temperature in the cockpit, his labored breathing, and the way he was clutching his left arm. First Officer Sandra Walsh had been flying as a commercial pilot for 8 years and had built her career on being thoroughly prepared for any situation that might arise during flight operations, but she had never actually faced a scenario where her captain became incapacitated during flight. She had practiced such emergencies extensively in the flight simulator during her recurrent training, working through the procedures for assuming command of the aircraft and coordinating with air traffic control and cabin crew. But the reality of having it happen at 37,000 feet over remote Colorado wilderness was far more terrifying than any simulation had prepared her for. "What kind of problem?" Walsh asked, trying to keep her voice steady and professional while her mind raced through the emergency procedures she had memorized but hoped never to use in real life. "How can I help?" Even as she spoke, she was scanning the instrument panel to ensure their flight path remained stable and safe, taking over the primary flying duties while trying to assess the severity of her captain's condition and determine what actions needed to be taken to protect the safety of their 156 passengers and crew members. "Severe headache, dizziness, nausea," Rodriguez managed to say, his training allowing him to provide the clinical details that would help his crew understand the seriousness of the situation even as the pain made it difficult to concentrate or think clearly. I think this might be." Before he could finish the sentence, his eyes rolled back and he slumped forward in his seat, completely unconscious and unresponsive. Walsh stared at her captain in shock for several precious seconds, her mind struggling to process the fact that she was now solely responsible for safely operating a Boeing 737 with 156 people aboard while flying over some of the most remote and challenging terrain in North America. The magnitude of the responsibility hit her like a physical blow. Every decision she made from this moment forward would determine whether those 156 people made it home to their families or became casualties of an aviation disaster that would be investigated for years to come. Her training kicked in after those first few seconds of shock, and she immediately took positive control of the aircraft, ensuring their flight path remained stable and safe while she processed the emergency situation and began implementing the procedures she had practiced so many times in the simulator. She checked Captain Rodriguez's pulse and breathing, both were present but weak, then reached for her radio with hands that were already beginning to shake from the stress and adrenaline of suddenly being in command during a life-threatening emergency. "Mayday, mayday, mayday," Walsh transmitted over the emergency frequency, her voice professional and clear despite the terror she felt inside as she spoke the words that would alert every air traffic control facility and emergency response agency within hundreds of miles that American Flight 1847 was in serious trouble. Denver Center, American 1847 Heavy declaring medical emergency. Captain is unconscious, appears to be cardiac event. First officer assuming command of aircraft. Request immediate priority handling and medical assistance. The words seemed to hang in the air of the cockpit, making the crisis suddenly, terrifyingly real in a way that all her simulator training had never quite captured. This wasn't practice anymore. This was 156 real people depending on her ability to handle an emergency that exceeded anything she had ever faced in her 8 years of commercial flying. The weight of that responsibility was almost overwhelming, and she had to consciously fight down the panic that threatened to cloud her judgment when clear thinking was most essential. The effect of the Mayday call rippled immediately through air traffic control centers across the northwestern United States as controllers recognized the seriousness of the situation and began implementing emergency response procedures. Denver Center, which was handling American 1847's flight following at the time of the emergency, immediately cleared all traffic away from the aircraft's current position and future flight path, giving Walsh complete priority in the busy airspace over Colorado and preparing to coordinate whatever assistance might be needed. In the passenger cabin, people began to notice that something unusual was happening when the aircraft's flight path became slightly erratic, with small course corrections and altitude changes that suggested the pilots were dealing with some kind of problem that required their immediate attention. The intercom crackled to life as First Officer Walsh's strained voice filled the passenger cabin, and even passengers who didn't usually pay attention to pilot announcements could hear the tension and stress that she was working hard to control. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is First Officer Walsh from the cockpit. We're experiencing a medical emergency with one of our crew members and will need to divert to the nearest suitable airport as quickly as possible. Please remain seated with your seatbelts securely fastened while we coordinate our emergency response with air traffic control and ground personnel." The announcement was professional and calm, but the underlying stress in Walsh's voice was unmistakable to anyone who was listening carefully. The announcement sent an immediate wave of anxiety through the passenger cabin as people realized their routine Saturday morning flight had suddenly become something much more dangerous and uncertain. Conversations stopped, phones came out as passengers tried to send messages to family members, and the nervous energy that always accompanied the realization that a flight was in trouble began spreading through the cabin like wildfire. Parents pulled their children closer, business travelers stopped working on their laptops, and everyone began looking around with the wide-eyed concern of people who understood they were in a situation beyond their control. Robert Kim looked over at Lily with protective concern. "Don't worry, sweetie," he said in what he hoped was a reassuring tone, though his own fear was visible. "I'm sure everything will be okay." Lily nodded politely, though she could hear the stress in First Officer Walsh's voice and understood from the aircraft's behavior that the situation was more serious than the adults realized. Up in the cockpit, First Officer Walsh was struggling with the overwhelming responsibility of managing both the medical emergency and complex flight operations. She was an experienced pilot with over 6,000 flight hours, but single-pilot operations in a Boeing 737 during an emergency exceeded her normal training. The workload was enormous, maintaining aircraft control, communicating with air traffic control, monitoring the captain's condition and planning an emergency approach. As the aircraft began its turn toward Denver, the flight path became increasingly erratic as Walsh struggled to manage the complex requirements while trying to coordinate with multiple agencies. The passengers could feel the aircraft's unstable behavior, and anxiety in the cabin was growing rapidly as people realized their situation was becoming desperate. It was then that 10-year-old Lily Chen made a decision that would shock everyone aboard. She had been listening to the stress in Walsh's voice and monitoring the aircraft's flight behavior with trained awareness. She understood that the first officer was becoming overwhelmed and that the situation was deteriorating toward potential disaster. Lily unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up in the aisle, her small figure immediately drawing attention from other passengers who expected children to remain seated during emergencies. "I can fly," she screamed at the top of her lungs, her young voice cutting through the cabin noise with startling clarity and authority. I know how to fly the airplane. The effect was immediate and electric. Every conversation in the cabin stopped as 155 adults turned to stare at the 10-year-old girl standing in row 9, their minds struggling to process what they had just heard. A child claiming she could fly a commercial aircraft? It seemed impossible, ridiculous. Robert Kim reached toward her with protective concern. "Sweetie, sit down," he said gently. "The grown-ups will handle this. You don't need to worry about flying the airplane." His response reflected the automatic assumption that children couldn't possibly possess knowledge to assist with serious adult problems. "I'm not scared and I'm not lying," Lily said with firmness that made several passengers pause and really look at her. "My daddy was Captain James Chin and he taught me how to fly before he died. I've been practicing on flight simulators for 2 years, and I know the Boeing 737 emergency procedures better than most adults." Her voice carried confidence and technical knowledge that was impossible to dismiss as childish fantasy. Jessica Martinez appeared beside her, trying to gently guide Lily back to her seat. "Honey, I know you want to help, but flying an airplane is very complicated," she said, clearly not believing a 10-year-old could possess meaningful aviation knowledge. "The best way you can help is by staying calm and letting the pilot do her job." "The pilot is overwhelmed and the airplane is not flying stable," Lily replied with technical accuracy that made Jessica stop and stare. "I can hear the engine harmonics changing and feel the control inputs through the airframe. First Officer Walsh is task-saturated and needs assistance with navigation, radio communications, and emergency checklist procedures. I can provide that assistance." The adult passengers exchanged glances that mixed disbelief with growing curiosity. This wasn't the rambling of a frightened child. Lily was using technical aviation terminology with precision and demonstrating knowledge that seemed impossible for someone her age. Thomas Anderson, a retired Air Force maintenance supervisor sitting across the aisle, had been listening to Lily's technical language with growing amazement. "Little girl," he said carefully, his tone more respectful than condescending, "what did you say your father's name was?" "Captain James Chin," Lily replied clearly. "He was a commercial pilot and flight instructor before he died in an aircraft accident 2 years ago. He started teaching me basic aviation principles when I was 6 years old." Her matter-of-fact tone and specific details were convincing several passengers that she might actually know what she was talking about. Thomas's eyes widened with recognition. "Jimmy Chin? I knew Jimmy Chin. He was one of the best pilots I ever worked with. If you're his daughter?" He trailed off, his expression changing from skepticism to genuine interest as he considered the possibility that this child might actually possess the knowledge she claimed. Meanwhile, First Officer Walsh was reaching the limits of her ability to handle the multiple tasks that the emergency required. Her radio communications were becoming increasingly strained, the aircraft's flight path was showing significant deviations, and she was showing signs of task saturation that led to pilot error and potential disaster. Dr. Patricia Williams, a child psychologist from Phoenix sitting in row 12, had been observing Lily's behavior with professional interest. "I've been watching this child since we boarded," she announced. "Her composure, her technical language, her analytical demeanor, this is not normal childhood behavior. She either has genuine knowledge or she's experiencing dissociation. Either way, we should listen to what she's saying." The debate among passengers was interrupted by another erratic course change as Walsh struggled with navigation while coordinating with air traffic control. The aircraft was clearly not being flown with normal precision, and everyone could feel their situation becoming more desperate. "You have 2 choices," Lily said with calm logic. "You can let First Officer Walsh try to handle everything alone and hope she doesn't make a mistake that kills all of us, or you can let me help her with procedures that I've practiced hundreds of times in realistic flight simulators." Thomas Anderson made a decision that would change everything. "I think we should listen to her," he announced, his Air Force experience giving weight to his opinion. "Jimmy Chin was one of the most thorough instructors I ever knew, and if he started training his daughter when she was young, she might actually know these procedures. What do we have to lose?" Jessica Martinez was facing a decision completely outside her training. Should she maintain normal protocols, or allow Lily to potentially provide assistance that might save everyone aboard? The strain in Walsh's voice and the aircraft's increasingly erratic behavior were making her consider options she would never have thought possible. "If I let you talk to the pilot," Jessica said carefully, "what exactly would you do to help?" She was still skeptical, but the deteriorating situation was making her reconsider. "I would assist with radio communications so she can focus on flying," Lily explained with professional precision. I would read emergency checklists and monitor engine parameters while she handles flight controls. I would help coordinate with air traffic control using standard phraseology that my father taught me. Her detailed explanation impressed passengers who recognized she was describing genuine aviation procedures rather than childish fantasy. Dr. Williams spoke up with her professional assessment. This child is displaying remarkable emotional regulation and technical competence under extreme stress. I believe she should be given the opportunity to demonstrate her capabilities. Another violent course correction threw several passengers against their armrests as Walsh struggled to maintain control. It was clear the situation was deteriorating rapidly, and conventional approaches weren't working. Take her to the cockpit, Thomas Anderson said firmly. If Jimmy Chen's daughter says she can help, then we're going to let her try. It's better than waiting to crash while we debate whether children can learn aviation procedures. Jessica took Lily's hand and began leading her toward the cockpit, still uncertain but recognizing they were facing a situation where normal rules might not apply. As they walked through the cabin, other passengers reached out to touch Lily's shoulder or offer encouragement, their skepticism replaced by desperate hope. The cockpit door opened to reveal Walsh struggling with multiple tasks while Rodriguez remained unconscious. Walsh looked up to see Jessica and Lily approaching, her expression showing surprise about why a child was being brought to the flight deck during an emergency. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice tight with stress. "This is Lily Chen," Jessica explained quickly. "She says her father was Captain James Chen and that she's trained in aviation procedures. She wants to help." Walsh stared at the small girl, her mind struggling to process the idea that a child might provide meaningful assistance. "I can assist with radio communications, checklist procedures, and system monitoring while you focus on flying," Lily said with professional directness, stepping into the cockpit with confident bearing. "My father taught me crew resource management principles, and I've practiced emergency scenarios extensively on Boeing 737 flight simulators." Walsh was desperate enough to consider any assistance. "What do you know about emergency approach procedures?" she asked, testing Lily's knowledge with a question that would quickly reveal whether the child understood aviation operations. "For pilot incapacitation emergencies, we need to declare Mayday, request priority handling, coordinate with emergency response teams, execute single pilot approach checklist, configure aircraft for emergency landing, and prepare cabin crew for potential evacuation procedures," Lily recited with textbook precision. "Current conditions require ILS approach with full emergency response at Denver International." Walsh stared at her in amazement. This 10-year-old had just demonstrated knowledge that many commercial pilots would struggle to articulate under pressure. "How could you possibly know all that?" "My father started teaching me when I was 6, Lily explained as she moved to the jump seat with efficient movements. "I've been studying aviation manuals and practicing emergency procedures for 4 years. I know this aircraft systems and emergency checklists better than most adults think possible." The proof came when Lily immediately began reading instrument displays with professional accuracy, noting discrepancies and offering corrections that demonstrated genuine understanding. "First Officer Walsh, you're 200 feet below assigned altitude and 15 degrees right of course for Denver approach," she observed calmly. "Should I coordinate with Denver Center for course correction while you focus on aircraft control?" Walsh realized she was looking at something unprecedented, a child with genuine aviation expertise who could actually help save everyone aboard. "Yes," she said, surrendering to the extraordinary circumstances. "Take the radio and help me coordinate this approach. But Lily, if we're going to do this together, I need you to be absolutely honest about what you do and don't know." "I understand, First Officer Walsh," Lily replied with mature responsibility. "I know exactly what I can and cannot do, and I will tell you immediately if we encounter anything beyond my knowledge. My father taught me that honest assessment of capabilities is the most important safety principle in aviation." What happened next would be remembered as one of the most extraordinary crew resource management demonstrations in commercial aviation history. Working together with perfect coordination, First Officer Walsh and 10-year-old Lily Chen began executing the complex procedures required to bring American Flight 1847 safely to Denver International Airport. Lily immediately took over radio communications with Denver Center, her young voice startling the controllers but her professional phraseology quickly convincing them they were dealing with someone who understood aviation procedures. "Denver Center, American 1847 requesting vectors for ILS approach runway 35 are, pilot incapacitation emergency, full emergency response required," she transmitted with textbook precision. "American 1847 Denver Center, came the controller's stunned response. Confirm you have qualified pilot assistance in the cockpit? Affirmative, Denver Center. We have crew resource management assistance from qualified personnel familiar with Boeing 737 emergency procedures, Lily replied, using phraseology that avoided mentioning her age while accurately describing her capabilities. As they began their descent toward Denver, Lily monitored engine parameters, read emergency checklists, and provided systematic backup that allowed Walsh to focus entirely on flying the aircraft during the emergency approach. Her father's training was evident in every aspect of her performance. The calm professionalism, precise communication, and analytical awareness that caught problems before they became critical. First officer, we're approaching the outer marker, Lily reported as they descended through 8,000 feet. Landing configuration checklist complete, emergency vehicles report ready on runway 35R, medical teams standing by for Captain Rodriguez. Her ability to coordinate multiple information sources while maintaining situational awareness impressed Walsh beyond anything she had experienced. The approach to Denver International Airport was textbook perfect, demonstrating what could be achieved when proper crew resource management principles were applied, regardless of crew member ages. Lily's calm voice provided continuous situation updates while Walsh executed a flawless single-pilot approach. 500 feet, airspeed 140 knots on glide path, landing checklist complete, Lily reported as the runway approached. Emergency response vehicles ready, medical teams standing by. Her professional performance during the most critical phase would later convince aviation authorities that age was irrelevant when assessing pilot capabilities based on knowledge and performance. American Flight 1847 touched down safely on runway 35R at Denver International Airport at 11:47 a.m. Mountain Time, less than 2 hours after Captain Rodriguez had collapsed. Emergency vehicles immediately surrounded the aircraft as Walsh brought it to a stop, their flashing lights creating controlled chaos of professional emergency response. As the engines wound down, Walsh turned to Lily with profound respect and gratitude. I could not have done this without you, she said quietly, her voice filled with emotion. Your knowledge, your professionalism, your calm under pressure, you saved everyone aboard this aircraft today. Lily smiled with quiet satisfaction that came from successfully applying her father's teachings when desperately needed. My dad always said that aviation knowledge isn't about age, it's about training, preparation, and willingness to help when help is needed, she replied. I'm just glad I could honor his memory by helping to bring everyone home safely. The passenger evacuation was swift and orderly, with emergency responders providing immediate care for Captain Rodriguez while passengers deplaned with relief and gratitude. Many sought out Lily as they left the aircraft, wanting to thank her personally and express their amazement. Thomas Anderson was among the first to find her in the terminal, his eyes filled with tears. Jimmy would be so proud of you, he said with deep emotion. You carried on his legacy in the most important way possible, by using his training to save lives when it really mattered. Robert Kim approached with respect that adults showed to heroes regardless of age. I'm sorry I didn't believe you at first, he said humbly. I learned something important today about not underestimating people based on age. You're an extraordinary young lady. The media response was immediate and overwhelming. News crews descended on Denver International Airport to interview the 10-year-old girl who had helped save a commercial airliner. Lily handled the attention with composed professionalism, though she consistently deflected praise toward First Officer Walsh and emphasized that she had simply applied her father's training. Captain Rodriguez made a full recovery from what doctors determined had been a severe migraine-induced episode. When released from the hospital, his first request was to meet Lily. I've been flying for 25 years, he told her, and I've never heard of anything like what you accomplished. Your father raised an exceptional aviator. The Federal Aviation Administration launched a comprehensive investigation, not to find fault but to understand how a 10-year-old had acquired the knowledge to assist effectively during a complex aviation emergency. Their findings would lead to recommendations about recognizing aviation expertise based on demonstrated competence rather than traditional systems emphasizing age over actual knowledge. The story of Lily Chen became a sensation in aviation circles, challenging fundamental assumptions about how aviation expertise was acquired and recognized. Flight instructors and training departments began studying her case to understand how someone so young had developed such advanced capabilities. American Airlines invited Lily to visit their training center in Dallas, where she demonstrated her knowledge for instructors who were amazed by her technical competence. She handles emergency scenarios better than some new hire pilots, observed the chief training pilot. Her systematic approach and calm decision-making are exactly what we try to teach. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from Flight 1847's passengers, who established a scholarship fund in Captain James Chen's name to support young people pursuing aviation careers. We wanted to honor both the father who provided extraordinary training and the daughter who used that training to save our lives, explained Thomas Anderson. 6 months later, Lily received her first formal flight lesson from an FAA-certified instructor. She already knows more about aviation theory than most of my adult students, the instructor noted. I'm basically teaching her practical skills to go with the knowledge she already possesses. Lily remained remarkably grounded despite the attention. She continued her aviation studies with even greater intensity, now with support from professional instructors and organizations that recognized her exceptional capabilities. Her bedroom simulator was upgraded with equipment donated by companies wanting to support her continued development. My dad always told me that aviation was about serving others and being prepared when people needed help, Lily said during interviews. I didn't think about my age or whether adults would believe me. I just knew people were in danger and I had knowledge that could help them. That's what my father taught me aviation was really about. The transformation was complete. She was no longer seen as just another 10-year-old, but as a young aviator who had proven that knowledge, preparation and courage were more important than age when lives were at stake. Flight 1847 had revealed that extraordinary capabilities sometimes came in unexpected packages. First Officer Walsh was promoted to captain 6 months early, with American Airlines citing her exceptional performance during the emergency. At her promotion ceremony, she requested Lily as her honored guest. She taught me more about aviation professionalism in 90 minutes than I had learned in years of flying, Walsh said. Age is irrelevant when dealing with true aviation expertise. Lily Chin had been just another child passenger in row 9 that Saturday morning, coloring quietly while adults made assumptions about her capabilities. But when Captain Rodriguez passed out at 30,000 feet and Walsh faced an overwhelming emergency alone, Lily had screamed, "I can fly," and transformed from overlooked child to essential crew member. The 10-year-old who had seemed so ordinary had revealed extraordinary capabilities when desperately needed, proving that sometimes the most important qualifications for handling aviation emergencies were knowledge, preparation, and courage to act when action was required, regardless of age. As Lily returned to normal life as a 5th grader in Phoenix, she carried the knowledge that she had honored her father's memory in the most meaningful way, by using his training to save lives when it mattered most. The shy girl in row 9 had become a hero of aviation, demonstrating that expertise, courage, and willingness to help others transcended age and challenged everyone's assumptions about what children could accomplish when properly trained and prepared. She had screamed, "I can fly," from row 9, and in doing so, had proven that sometimes the most extraordinary heroes come in the most unexpected forms, like a 10-year-old girl with her father's knowledge, her own courage, and the determination to use both when 156 lives depended on her willingness to step forward and help when no one else could.